This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
Chris Goffard here at LA Times Studios. Thanks for joining us on Crimes of the Times. In today's episode, the story of Synanon, the drug rehabilitation group once known as the Miracle on the Beach, and the rattlesnake attack on the crusading Los Angeles lawyer who made an enemy of the group's leader. Tell us what you think in the comments below. The lawyer was expecting assassins. His work had made him dangerous enemies, and he was taking every precaution. And so by October 1978, Paul Morantz was checking underneath his car for bombs and warning people in his Pacific Palisades neighborhood to look out for strangers.
He went door to door and told all of them, if you ever see a suspicious car in front of my house, please write down the license number.
This is Narda Zecchino, a former Los Angeles Times reporter who knew Paul Morantz well and worked with him.
And he told them that his life was threatened, and if they saw anything suspicious, to let him know.
Better than anyone, the 32-year-old attorney was aware of the violent side of the drug rehab organization he'd been aggressively challenging in court, Synanon. The group's increasingly unhinged and paranoid founder, Chuck Dederich, who called himself Big Daddy, harbored a special animosity for Paul Morantz.
He was enemy number one. Dederich hated him.
Paul Morantz had purchased a shotgun in case his enemies burst through his door. He had alerted the local authorities that his life was in danger. But Morantz was distracted as he arrived home on the late afternoon of October 10, 1978. Distracted because he was an exuberant baseball fan and the World Series was about to start, with the hometown Dodgers playing the Yankees. Distracted as he reached into the mail slot of his living room wall to retrieve what looked like a package.
I wasn't wearing glasses because I didn't own any because I was too vain. And I often didn't put in my heart contacts because they were too painful.
This is Morantz decades later describing that moment to an interviewer.
Now, this was a time in which before I start my car, I would search underneath it. I would look both ways, crossing the streets. I wouldn't enter my house if my dogs weren't barking. And yet with all these precautions, I just didn't think.
He did not hear the rattlesnake coiled inside the mail slot because its rattles had been removed. It was a fully grown snake, 4.5 feet long. The fangs sank in just below his left thumb.
When the head came out and bit my hand, I remember thinking, no, this one was too stupid. They can't have pulled this off.
Everybody knew it had to be Synanon. He's yelling out, Synanon got me, Synanon got me, and then he collapses.
Richard Offshee is a retired Berkeley sociologist who studied Synanon and wrote a book about it. Morantz was screaming for help as the venom coursed through him.
When he was laying on the grass, he said, please, please call Narda Zecchino at the LA Times and tell her she's next.
Today on Crimes of the Times, the story of Synanon, a rehab group that was once widely celebrated, and the rattlesnake attack against a lawyer who had made it his mission to take them down. Before we get to the snake-bit attorney writhing on the lawn outside his house that day in 1978, it's important to understand what Synanon was and where it came from. It was the brainchild of Chuck Dederich, who called himself Big Daddy, the Chief, or the Old Man. He was a recovering alcoholic with a harsh, booming voice and a face half paralyzed by a childhood bout of meningitis. Since the day he founded Synanon as a home for so-called dope fiends in Santa Monica in the late 1950s, he had been its unquestioned leader. Richard Offshee, the sociologist, told me Synanon's origins could be traced to Dieterich's involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous.
He was a belligerent sort of drunk, even when he wasn't drunk. He was a grifter, and proved himself to be a con man as soon as he got the opportunity to con somebody about just about anything. And so he's taking part in these AA meetings. But he was such an egomaniac that he just couldn't follow the AA format, stand up and say his thing and then sit down and so on. He just was more interactive than that. Some addicts started hanging out at this rented facility, which was where the AA meetings were held. Heroin addicts, they needed a place to stay.
Synanon took over the sprawling Casa del Mar Hotel in Santa Monica, and Diederich promised revolutionary success in how drug addiction was treated. Celebrities showed up to be seen there. Life magazine called it the miracle on the beach.
Diederich claimed that Synanon was the key to curing heroin addiction. It was sort of cutting edge in that way, if it were true, which it was not.
Synanon grew into a multi-million-dollar business, and members became known for their shaved heads and farmers' overalls. The group commanded intense loyalty from members. Many of them swore it had saved them from addiction. The group's governing ritual was a form of group therapy called the game. In the game, the members sat in a room and unleashed verbal attacks on one another. It was supposed to provide catharsis for the emotionally throttled. Diederich described the game as, quote, a gimmick that no one else seems to have. It was based on what he called, quote, uninhibited conversations, yelling, castigation, aggression, lying. He said, anything goes short of physical violence or threats of physical violence.
You could directly confront somebody about something, or you could make up stuff and confront them about things that you made up and just attack them for the fun of attacking them. Diederich claimed that participation in the Synanon game was what made the difference and allowed these people to live in Synanon and to get rehabilitated. Eventually, Diederich admits that it only works as long as you are resident in Synanon.
The group expanded far beyond drug rehab and established what it billed as a utopian community. By 1977, after years of glowing and unskeptical stories, the news coverage had become darker and more critical. Time magazine was calling Synanon a kooky cult. The magazine highlighted how Diederich, now in his mid-60s, was aggressively encouraging his members to get vasectomies. The so-called game was a tool to break down the resistors.
Pressure was put on every male in Synanon except Charles Diederich to get a vasectomy. The scene is there'd be a marathon Synanon game going on in one room, big room. People who were resisting would be dropped into that marathon game until they stopped resisting. And there would be a preponderance of people who were there to attack them and some people who were being rotated in to be worked on. When they broke, they were let out through a door, and in the next room, an operating room had been set up, and the Synanon doctors sterilized the people who had just been broken in the Synanon game and were subjecting themselves to vasectomies. I remember there was a story about a father who went in with his two sons, and all three of them got sterilized together.
Afshi told me that Diederich demanded these sacrifices as a way of weeding out the uncommitted. They were loyalty tests.
The one thing that Diederich understood was if you're going to be an authoritarian leader, loyalty is more important than anything else. It's not population size that matters, it's the average level of loyalty in the group that really matters. You're much better off to get rid of the people who are possible dissenters because you'll constantly have a problem with them. That's what Diederich did time after time after time. It wasn't just the vasectomies. At one point, Diederich declared everyone in Synanon had to change partners. Every married couple had to split up and be reconnected with somebody else.
Another test of loyalty, Afshi told me, was the willingness to use violence. It was an inversion of the nonviolent ethos that he had originally preached.
That was another one of the principles of the utopian community, nonviolence. So if you want to find out who's going to object, take the principles that attracted people to the organization, reverse those principles, see where you get resistance, and then drive those people out.
Reports of violence associated with Synanon were multiplying as its soldiers punished critics and defectors. Diederich had launched a private security force called the Imperial Marines. A prosecutor would describe it as, quote, a combat-ready paramilitary unit trained in martial arts, weapons, high-speed automobile chases, and the like. Here is Diederich explaining to a reporter why he was building a security force.
I can't brush this off. I just can't. Threatening telephone calls, threatening notes, filthy mail, and so on.
Diederich cast his antagonists as mortal enemies who are trying to destroy all of Synanon's good works. Increasingly, he was fixated on one Los Angeles lawyer in particular.
There are so many things in life that we never get around to. Taking up that hobby, cleaning out the garage, little things that don't really make a huge difference in our lives. Yet there's one thing that most of us have probably been neglecting that can have a huge impact on our family's future. It's life insurance, and with SelectQuote, getting covered with the right policy for you is easier and more affordable than you may think. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes. Go to SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/crimesofthetimes.
Have you ever woken up with a funky symptom and immediately Googled it to see what's wrong? We've all gone down that rabbit hole, but it's time to get the help and care you really need with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty. Once you find the right doctor, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time slot that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit. I just used ZocDoc the other week and I got an appointment the same day. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes and find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes. ZocDoc.com/crimesofthetimes.
By 1978, Los Angeles attorney Paul Morantz had become one of Synanon's most visible critics. He represented a woman who said members had kidnapped and brainwashed her. He had tried to get Synanon leader Chuck Diederich to testify under oath and had won a $300,000 judgment when Diederich refused to submit to a deposition. Morantz had been following reports of violence associated with the group. Members had beaten neighbors near Synanon's remote mountain compound in central California. A former member had been attacked and nearly killed outside his home in Berkeley. Morantz knew that he was in danger. He also feared for Nardo Zecchino at the Los Angeles Times, who had been writing critical stories about the group.
It took a while to get people because they were frightened.
He had been directing sources to Zecchino, encouraging them to trust her.
Paul, they trusted him so much because they knew what he was trying to do. He would talk to people and then say, would you be willing to talk to a reporter?
One day, Synanon sent a man to her door.
I think he had a shaved head when they were shaving their heads. And it scared me. He said, I know you're in there. I heard your television. So I immediately went to the phone and called my city editor. not the police, my city editor. And I said, Synanon's here. And he said, Narda, don't open the door.
Her editor called police, but it turned out that the Synanon member lived in the same apartment complex. So they had to employ a ruse to separate them.
We can't make him go away because he lives in this complex. The officer came in. He said, here's what we're going to do. He said, we're going to walk him over to his building, walk him as slowly as we can. If you want to leave, you can leave. And so I packed a bag as fast as I could.
Synanon had discovered the tactic of discouraging critical coverage with lawsuits, and the Times lawyer wanted to proceed cautiously.
Every single story I wrote, I had to sit down with the lawyer, go over every word. It would take sometimes 2 days trying to protect us from getting sued because they knew that Synanon was so litigious.
On October 7th, 1978, Zecchino reported that New York and Berkeley authorities were probing threats that Synanon had made against journalists. She knew Synanon was also under investigation for threatening enemies in Los Angeles, but she couldn't get that part past the newspaper lawyer. She wondered whether that might have deterred the attack on Paul Morantz 3 days later. When Morantz reached into his mail chute and the rattlesnake's fangs struck, he ran outside yelling for help and found neighbors who sprang into service. One brought ice, another used a shirt to make a tourniquet. A firefighter decapitated the snake with a shovel and flushed the head down the toilet. Zecchino got the call conveying Morantz's warning that she was next, and she headed to the hospital to find him.
It was like pandemonium. There were cops everywhere. Everybody was there. Media was there. And I went up to the desk, and I said, I need to see Paul Morantz. I think I said, I'm his sister, and I need to see him. And they let me in right away. And he actually laughed. I walked in the room. He said, I knew you'd get in. He was smiling, and he said if they had taken me to another hospital, I could have died.
There at USC Medical Center, Morantz was wheeled out in his hospital bed to face the press. He had no doubt the snake had come from Synanon. Looking at photos of Morantz, it's possible to see a kind of relief in his face, not just because he'd survived, but because now people would begin to take him seriously about the group's violent side.
I think he felt like euphoric because finally, this is like, nobody is going to support these people after this, right? Nobody. I mean, just the horror of it. And you put in your hand to get the mail and the snake bites you with its fangs in your hand. The idea of that is like nightmarish. These things don't happen. How does this happen? I mean, that's craziness. If you think you're going to kill somebody that way and you put a snake in their mailbox, your imagination kind of goes wild. What else have they done, or what else could they do?
Speaking to the media from his hospital bed, Morantz said, those people who put the snake in my mailbox do not think of themselves as criminals, I'm sure, but believe themselves to be serving a higher purpose.
That was back in the days when the national news came on at 6 o'clock at night, and everybody had dinner and the national news at the same time.
This is Richard Offshee, the retired Berkeley sociologist.
The lead on that went, a crime happened today that is weird even by California standards or something like that, and then reported the Synanon, the rattlesnake attack. It certainly got Synanon into the public eye.
Here is Morantz years after the attack, describing the pain of the rattlesnake bite to the interviewer Martin Lasden.
See, part of the poison kills, but another point destroys tissue and softens it so that it can swallow the animal. And that is very painful because it's destroying the tissue inside your hand. I once made it comparable to having your hand in a vice and someone's cranking it up. And then there's a pause, and then they start re-cranking again.
The crime was swiftly solved. An alert neighbor had seen two men approach Morantz's house and put something hastily in his mail slot before driving away in a green sedan. The neighbor made note of the plate number, and police traced it to the Synanon compound in Badger. The odometer showed the car had traveled 1,000 miles the week of the attack. It was the distance of a round trip to and from the lawyer's block in Pacific Palisades. Police seized 13 audio tapes from the compound. They found hours of Diederich ranting menacingly in his distinctive bombastic growl. He could be heard inveighing against what he called greedy lawyers and describing his so-called religious posture.
Don't mess with us. You can get killed dead. Physically dead.
Diederich said, "I'm quite willing to break some lawyer's legs and then tell him next time I'm going to break your wife's legs and then we're going to cut your kid's arm off. Try me. This is only a sample, you son of a bitch, and that's the end of your lawyer. I want to crack some bones." The menace of Diederich's message alarmed the woman Paul Marantz had planned to marry. She had 2 children from another relationship and was terrified of what Synanon might do.
Diederich talked about the training in the Imperial Marines, people they had beaten up, that they were going to kill people. And they mentioned the lawyers were the worst enemies, and the end of the tape was, then we get his wife, and then we get his kids. And I looked at her face, and I knew she was gone.
The media got the tapes and played them endlessly. A Synanon lawyer explained that Diederich didn't really mean it. He was just a sick old man who talked like a dockhand and indulged in hyperbole. But public anxiety about cults and violence-prone messiahs had reached new heights. Just a month after the rattlesnake attack on Marantz, People's Temple founder Jim Jones presided over the mass suicide of his followers in Guyana. More than 900 people died, many of them after drinking cyanide-laced punch. When police came to arrest Chuck Diederich, he was too drunk to walk. The man who boasted of rescuing thousands of addicts was now being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. 2 of his Imperial Marines were arrested on suspicion of executing the attack. One was Joseph Musico, a 28-year-old Vietnam War combat veteran who struggled with heroin. The other was Lance Kenton, 20 years old. Police had lifted his fingerprint from the window of the green sedan. He was the son of the famous jazz musician Stan Kenton and had been raised by Synanon while his dad was on the road. In July 1980, the 3 defendants pleaded no contest to charges connected to the attack. Marantz did not want long sentences for men he considered victims of Diederich's manipulation. He said, "I can't find it in my heart to feel that Kenton and Musico should spend their lives in prison." Diederich was spared jail time, but barred from a leadership position in the group he had founded. His Imperial Marines each got a year in jail. Marantz wrote a memoir called Escape, My Lifelong War Against Cults, with a rattlesnake on the cover. In it, Marantz wrote that he had developed an obsession with Diederich, and that when he finally met him at a deposition, he sensed, quote, a powerful, creepy bond with him.
I was captured. I was past the point of no return. And Diederich was captured by me. I was out there to destroy him. And so we both had a sort of morbid curiosity about the other.
Marantz called the rattlesnake attack Synanon's Pearl Harbor, the event that exposed what he called a cesspool ruled by violence and one man's madness. But what really destroyed Synanon was the Internal Revenue Service, which revoked its tax-exempt status and stuck it with a massive bill for back taxes and penalties. The group dissolved in 1991. Its founder survived 6 more years. Along with Diederich, Musico, one of the Imperial Marines convicted in the snake attack, is dead. That leaves Lance Kenton, the son of the famous musician. I wanted to know what he had to say about what he had done and why nearly half a century later. What he told me after the break.
Hi, I'm Jonathan, one of the producers for Crimes of the Times. Before I became a dad, I thought I knew what tired felt like. But let me tell you, sleep deprivation hits differently when you're juggling a newborn and a full-time job. Proper sleep is the foundation of whole body health. It increases focus, boosts energy, and improves your mood. That's why we're so excited to talk about Beam's Dream Powder, a science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep. I've tried other sleep aids, but Dream is different. It's delicious. My go-to is the cinnamon cocoa, and totally guilt-free with only 15 calories and 0 grams of sugar. Other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess, but Dream contains a powerful, all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. I just mix Dream with hot water and enjoy before bed. It's that easy. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/crimes and use code CRIMES for up to 40% off.
Hi, my name is Mary, and I'm one of the producers of the show. I want to take a quick second to tell you about Quince. With Quince, I get high-end, versatile pieces at prices I can afford. Quince has all the must-haves like Mongolian cashmere crewneck sweaters from $50, iconic 100% leather jackets, and versatile flow-knit activewear. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices, along with premium fabrics and finishes. I own the Mongolian cashmere cardigan, and it's one of the softest items in my closet. I swear I've worn this like twice a week since getting it. Indulge in affordable luxury. Go to quince.com/crimesofthetime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/crimesofthetime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crimesofthetime.
It's sort of very similar as to being a foster parent. You go in it not for the length of time, but to know that even 2 months or 10 years can still create a big impact in a child's life. So CASA is a nonprofit organization that stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocate, and they specialize in making sure that the child's needs are met, whether it's medical, health, educational, and ensuring that the child is receiving the most stability they can.
I wanted to talk to the men who had put the snake in Paul Morance's mailbox, and only one of them is still alive, Lance Kenton. He's in his mid-60s now and managing properties in Malibu. We talked briefly by phone, but I couldn't get him back on the line to record him. My guess is he did not like the direction of the conversation. He had only nice things to say about Synanon. He called it, quote, probably the single greatest community to grow up in. He told me he was sent there at age 11. His father, the jazz musician, was frequently on the road and paid the group $750 a month to take care of him. In his early teens, he moved to the group's mountain compound in Badger, California. He said it was a happy childhood, full of freedom, with a sprawling, non-biological family. He was an enthusiastic participant in the game. He told me it was catharsis and a lubricant for a community. In his words, it enabled all of us to air and share gripes and move forward. Here in society, you walk along with prejudice. In Synanon, there was none. Kenton told me he submitted to a vasectomy just after he turned 18 because it made philosophical sense to him. He said, why not be a parent to someone who needs a parent instead of having your own child? That increases the population of people who need parents. When Diederich launched the Imperial Marines, Kenton was picked for the 3-month training. He loved Synanon and believed in its mission. He was good with snakes. He did not want to talk about his role in the attack on Paul Morantz, to which he had pleaded no contest, but his disdain for Morantz was strong nearly half a century later. He spoke of him as a man who didn't understand Synanon and only focused on its disgruntled former members. As Morantz was recovering from the snakebite, the attorney told LA Times reporter Narda Zucchino that police had found a second rattlesnake in the canyon behind his house and that he believed it had been intended for her.
I always wondered, was that second snake for me? Is it true what Paul said?
Recently, at a screening party for a documentary about Synanon, Zucchino spotted Lance Kenton and walked up to him. She wanted to know if she had been marked for death.
I said, I just need to know. I want to know, was that second snake for me? And he said, I don't know about a second snake.
During my brief conversation with him, Kenton told me he does not blame the founder, Chuck Diederich, for the violence that became associated with Synanon. He said people decided to do things that he didn't necessarily know about.
Total bull. As far as not blaming Diederich. I mean, that's absurd.
But do you think that Diederich was a charlatan and a malevolent personality all the way along, or did he start with some kind of good intentions and then become corrupted? Or what's your opinion about the...
I think he was a grifter and a con man his whole life.
Even to this day, people who've been through the program, people like Kenton, they still speak in terms of reverence, almost worship, about Diederich.
Of course they do, because they were believers.
The year of the rattlesnake attack, Afshi was working as a consultant for the Point Reyes Light, a tiny weekly newspaper in Marin County, where Synanon had its headquarters. The paper was run by a husband and wife team. Editor David Mitchell spearheaded a series critical of Synanon, coverage which would win the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 1979. Paul Morantz died at age 77 in 2022. The snake attack made his name, but it cost him heavily. The pain in his hand never really went away. There was bone cancer, chemo, and red blood cell aplasia that left him needing regular transfusions.
Paul was hit with a very serious arthritic illness. He was very debilitated for the last 15, 20 years of his life.
It was impossible to prove, but Morantz thought the venom had been killing him slowly for decades.
Anything can happen to anybody, but I think there's reason to believe that the rattlesnake venom could have started that going.
Morantz had a son, Chaz, who told me that former Synanon members regarded his father as a hero and a friend. He had a reputation as a kind of niche lawyer who specialized in cults. His son took inspiration from his father's favorite film, Apollo 13, and joined the big team of engineers that put the rover Curiosity on Mars. But listening to Morantz boast about him, it was easy to think his son had done it single-handedly. In his late 60s, Morantz told an interviewer about how much his battle with Synanon had cost him. It had scared away the woman he planned to marry and wrecked his health.
My fiance at the time, I was going to get married, had 2 kids, and she became too afraid and left, and I took that very hard. So the life that I thought I was going to have with her was gone.
But if he had not put his hand in the mail chute, his fiancée might have stayed, and he would not have married the woman who gave him a son who helped steer a wheeled robot across the surface of the red planet.
If all that had happened, he would not have been born, and Curiosity might have crash-landed on Mars.
Knowing that his son's existence hinged on it, he said, he would not have done anything differently.
I would have stuck my hand in the mailbox.
From LA Times Studios, this is Crimes of the Times. To read more about these cases, check out Crimes of the Times at latimes.com. We also have a link to our video episodes in the show notes. This episode was written and reported by me, your host, Christopher Goffard. Our senior producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett, with sound design by Jonathan Shiflett. Executive editor is Deborah Anderlew. Associate producer is Jordan Patterson. Video editing by Cooper Kenward. Production services provided by JTB Studios. Our camera technicians and operators are Jeff Amlott, Julia McCabe, and Jason Newbert, with additional production support from Andrew Gombert, Patrick Stewart, and Anne-Marie Hauser. Denise Callahan is our studio manager. Ben Church is our production manager. Thanks to Martin Lasden, who hosted the show Legally Speaking, for permission to use his 2013 interview with Paul Morantz. Special thanks to LA Times Studios President Anna Magzanian, President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times, Chris Argenteri, and Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times, Terry Tang. Crimes of the Times is executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson and me, Christopher Goffard.